Well, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you've not taken a minute, please put your name and contact information into the chat. Welcome to today's ECHO session. We are recording today's session. We store that on our Canvas page as well as on our YouTube channel. We use that for educational and quality improvement purposes, and a way to go back and review that for people that want to share with colleagues or at different times within that context. If you'll take a minute and rename your profile, you can do that by using those three dots at the top of your picture. And if you haven't figured out how to raise your hand in Zoom, here's how you do that, as well as you can put any comments or information into the chat, and Kurt and Bailey monitor that for us. We are always talking about sensitive topics or with different families. So please remember to just protect individual privacy, avoid using any identifiable information. If you have any questions, please reach out to a hub member. They all have an asterisk in front of their name. You can reach them on chat or just let us know if you have any questions. ECHO, if you've never joined an ECHO session, is a really interactive community. We are hoping that we're all learning from each other. We are encouraged to ask questions, to talk about situations. That's how we learn, learning from each other. All of us have great skills and knowledge. That's just a great way to share that. And that's where those case narratives come in. Case narratives are a great way to get information from other colleagues, from other people that have maybe had that same experience, to take back and work on your own cases. So if you have a case that you're struggling with, or you just want new ideas, you don't necessarily have to be struggling with a case. Let us know. Reach out to Project Scope at usu.edu and we'll get you on the schedule. Key components of an ECHO session are ones to just build that community of practice so that we know who is in our network that we could reach out to for questions. We have a didactic speaker, and then the case narratives and small breakout groups to provide some feedback on that. Case studies, again, are a great way to just receive information, take it back and apply. So if you're interested, please reach out to Project Scope. And then in order to get a credit of attendance, we do ask that you will fill out the surveys. The surveys come out after each session, and a huge shout out to everybody who has completed surveys. It's also a way that we are able to keep these sessions free of no charge to everybody. So this surveys typically come out in what is called red cap that sometimes goes to your spam. So please, if you've not gotten that, check your spam folder. Canvas is the way where we store all of our recordings, our PowerPoints, any information from our sessions. So if you need to access the Canvas and you haven't gotten an invite, please email projectscope@usu.edu. I'm thrilled today to turn the time over to Kyla Clark, who is the program administrator for strengthening families within the Division of Child and Family Services. She's going to help us navigate that system. It's going to be a great session. So I'm going to stop sharing and let her take that over.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Maybe I'm going to share my screen because it's not on the tab I want. Hold for it. There we go. Now I'm going to share my screen. Is everybody seeing? Oh, the end of my slideshow. That's exciting too. All right. We're just going to, nobody have a seizure. We're going to back up. Okay, there we go. How is everybody this fine lunch hour? Hopefully you've got a snack and we're ready to talk about child welfare. So for my sake, if everyone could just kind of put in the chat your familiarity with DCFS from, I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is. That would be your low familiarity. Your medium is some contact or super familiar, worked with them before, have thoughts and questions. So we've got a medium. Yeah, so medium, low, medium, or high involvement. Medium, wow, okay, 15 years of involvement. High, medium, okay. And I'm doing this mostly because a lot of our walk through the system tends to stop. Oh, we've got a permanency. Used to work for permanency, so I might turn the time over to you. We definitely, these walk through the system sometimes start at very, very kind of intro to the concept of DCFS. I think everyone want to make sure that we're using the most of our time and not doing a 101 when we've got everybody who kind of has some groundwork. So child welfare for DCFS in the state of Utah has one very simple mission statement, and that is safe children and strengthened families. They really need to go hand in hand. A lot of times child welfare systems are either looked at child protecting or family protecting. We really are trying to strike that balance because we know that whenever possible, it is best to strengthen a child within their family system. And the way we do that is through holistic approaches, helping all members of the family, and that's how you keep children safe. So looking at just some data related to child welfare, we have our centralized intake. That's how any situation gets brought to DCFS's attention, right? So there are a lot of system serving agencies or child serving agencies prior to DCFS. We like to think of ourselves as kind of the end of the train. So I see on here, we've got some great people from DDI Vantage. We love when people can connect to you in the community and not have to come through us. There's home visiting. We've heard about nurse family partnership. We really should be here for abuse and neglect and dependency issues only. So when we talk about the things that get reported to our centralized intake as far as neglect or abuse, these are things that you would see in a parent that might be concerning. So if we're seeing parents that are blaming children for their behavior, so if you're working with a family and they really have very harsh discipline with their children, really unrealistic expectations, sometimes you see some secretive behavior or some coaching of children on how to speak to you, rejection of child. We see actually quite a lot of this with the young kids where maybe it's a parent who's really struggling to bond and they're not meeting their child's needs. History of physical abuse. So, we do look at patterns of behavior and then any domestic violence in the home. These would be things that we would look into as abuse and be reasons why DCFS intake would be called. Neglect looks a little different. Again, some of that indifference. Sometimes depression can lead to neglect. Obviously, some substance use issues can lead to neglect. Sometimes we're seeing mental health, so irrational behavior, unrealistic expectations. Sometimes we'll get involved maybe with some like unmedicated schizophrenic behavior. Those sort of situations would be stuff that gets called in and responded to by our intake. What these signs look like in children, I think you guys probably are really good experts at as well. Okay, there we go. So when we say children for the state of Utah, that is any person under the age of 18 for abuse, neglect, and dependency, and we have to have an ability to locate them. So when we look at numbers in a minute, you'll see a lot of calls come in, and then it narrows a lot to how many we actually investigate. And part of that is a lot of calls we get are, I saw this mom yelling at her kid in the middle of Walmart, but we don't know the kid's name. I don't know how long, like, chances are by the time anyone drove out there, they're no longer in Walmart. We don't have a way to find them again. So a lot of those are automatically going to be ruled out just because we don't have a way to locate that child. Sometimes people are calling and they just need resources. And so our intake hotline does do a good job of connecting to resources. And then as of 2020, calls that come in related solely to marijuana use during pregnancy without any impairment to the child, those also will get deferred to substance abuse and mental health. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So some of the signs of abuse in children, and again, this is not an exhaustive list. These just are kind of our most common signs that you'll notice. Are injury, obviously, withdrawal, unusual sexual behavior or reactivity, aggression, changes in behavior. So very like noticeable behavior change, strained relationships, people that they are suddenly fearful of, people that they won't go to anymore, bedwetting, passivity, and suicidal ideation for some of our older children. Neglect can sometimes be hunger, can be stealing or hoarding food, being non-supervised. That tends to be one of our bigger supported findings for neglect here in the state of Utah, are kids that are too young to be out, but are out unsupervised. Non-appropriate clothing, odor, issues with self-care. And sometimes these can be also medical neglect, so not making medical appointments, especially if they have an identified medical need. So this is a little bit more of what we were talking about with the reporting requirement change. And I'm curious, it's always hard in these like didactic portion, but I'm curious how many of you were aware that there was actually a reporting requirement change in 2020? I know this went out to our birthing hospitals, but I don't know that it really got as much attention. Utah actually led the way in really trying to encourage treatment for parents, or for mothers suffering with substance use addiction during pregnancy. And so this is really focused on not being punitive and trying our best to connect to services and resources as opposed to driving parents underground. I don't know if this is probably news to everybody, but nobody's excited when child welfare shows up at their door. We are definitely the agency that people attempt to avoid. And what we see across the nation with very punitive laws related to fetal exposure is that it tends to actually lead to a drop in hospital birth. It leads to a drop in prenatal care, because people who have an active addiction know that they're going to be reported to the authorities. And so they don't seek out the medical treatment that they need during a pregnancy. And so we really are trying to make this more about, let's get you help, let's get you connected. And then we're still here if at the time of delivery you are in a place of your addiction that you cannot safely take care of your child. Child welfare will then respond at that point. But we're trying to get as far upstream as possible, because every day of sobriety during that pregnancy is better for that infant. So, and we really wanted to connect substance use to adverse effects and threats of harm. It's kind of an interesting, substance use and parenting has a very interesting history, and I'm going to be a tiny bit, I don't know, a little edgy here for a second, but there was a point in our history not that long ago where stay-at-home moms were pretty heavily medicated with things that are class 3 narcotics right now. Like, that was pretty normal, that was how parents, depressed moms were given substances to parent. Not advocating that we go back there, but it is something that I think we get very black and white. Like, substance use automatically means that you can't parent, when there are certain medications that maybe a parent really does need. So looking at things like putting a parent on buprenorphine or putting a parent on Suboxone so that they can deal with their addiction and still be an attentive parent. We really want to look at that. Are they actually able to meet their children's needs? This also goes to any other parent caring for the child. So maybe mom is doing okay, but we have real concerns about father in that delivery room or in that postpartum room. Those are also still reportable to child welfare. Any thoughts or questions or concerns on what I've said so far? All right. Well, we'll just keep.
Kyla, I'm sorry, I didn't get to my unmute as quick as I wanted to. So how are families learning about this new reporting?
So we did do a media release back in 2020. And then what we're really hoping is that our doctors are learning. So we did a research study, which I thought was really amazing. So trying to reach out to delivery hospitals to talk about how we connect to services. We start, and then they said to go talk to the, OBGYN community. And we had done this provider survey and found out that most of our parents actually find out that they're pregnant in an Instacare. But when we reached out to like the emergency rooms or the Instacares, they're like, we don't do prenatal. We don't need this training. We don't need this understanding. And it really helped highlight that we have kind of a service gap for this particular population, where they're really not going to a primary care physician or an OBGYN. It's typically not a planned pregnancy or, something that you're going through fertility treatments to get to. It's usually a surprise at these Instacares. And so now we're working with that community to really kind of get word out in there about it's okay if you do test positive here for pregnancy that you also admit to substance use, because historically that actually had to go in your record and then it had to be reported at the time of birth. And it basically loomed over you your entire pregnancy. And so that's what this change was trying to say is your doctors don't actually have to report you until the time of delivery. So now let's use however many months of your pregnancy we have left to connect you to services. The other place that this really was fixing for us was we would have moms already at somewhere like House of Hope or Odyssey House in residential drug treatment that go and deliver a baby, and then DCFS gets called on them when they're already doing 100% of what we would expect them or ask them to do. And basically, we're very stressful, and we should not have to come and stress you out when you're already doing the very intervention that we would ask you to do.
Yes.
Did that answer your question?
It certainly did. Thank you so much. And then Pat says that she's involved with newborns in birth hospitals and is very excited to see just how kind and supportive frontline staff are.
That's so great to hear. We've really been working on, we want to be the softer side of DCFS. We were speaking about old commercials earlier, the softer side of Sears, the softer side of child welfare. We don't need to always come in as the hammer. We know that it's scary. Nobody wants to wind up at this part of our system. So it's great to hear that we really are coming in and being understanding and considerate and really trying to work with the whole family. Obviously, we want to keep kids safe, but we want to be strengthening that family as well. All right.
So if we are working with a family and a parent is abusing some substance, are we no longer mandated reporters? Or like, what is our role? When do we call? And like, what is the experience of the family if we do call?
So, that's a beautiful question. Okay, so if you're concerned that the parent's substance use is interfering with their ability to parent, right? Especially things that really so the one thing in Utah state statute that absolutely says is contradictory to parent or to parenting is meth use. If you are aware of meth use, that should always be called in. The one that gets a little squeakier is THC use. THC use has some weird laws in the state of Utah. You have to actually be able to report that they're using THC and it's impacting their ability to parent. Any other substance, you can say they're using the substance, we're concerned, and you can call that into intake. The only one that you're going to get questioned on is the THC use, and it has to just say, and it can be as simple as, yeah, I'm worried they're sleeping in the middle of the day, or they're really checked out, or they don't seem to know where their kids are in the middle of the day. Like all of those things would still be responded to by child welfare. And if you call it in and it's just THC and we don't open it, those do get deferred to home visiting and substance abuse and mental health. So it's still worth calling it. And the experience, so we'll get into kind of what that looks like if we do open a CPS investigation. So this is just a slide, and I think these will be in the Canvas app. So this is our administrator over our intake hotline. It is centralized, which means it's one call for the whole state. Years ago, back in the dark ages, we did have one for each region, and sometimes that got a little bit funky. So now it's one center. It is manned 24/7, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and they will screen your calls and respond appropriately. And so we'll talk a little bit about the different response levels. Any other questions?
There's one in the chat, Kyla. It just says, can a pregnant woman get a medical marijuana card?
Yes. The short answer to that is yes. There are pregnant women with active medical marijuana cards. And that is a topic of heavy debate. I've been in many meetings of heavy debate on that one. All right, so kind of what I said about, we'll look at some numbers. So these numbers come out of 2020. 2020, there was 40,367 calls into that intake hotline number. And about half of those were accepted for CPS to do an assessment. So that means that someone from our Child Protective Services division went out and met face-to-face with that child and that family. Of those, 7,334 were confirmed to be abuse and neglect. And of those, you have 5,000 that received in-home services, which is the program that I'm specifically over, which are services to families that remain intact. So that can be with or without court supervision, but the children do not come into foster care. So the vast majority of families that have contact with DCFS keep their children and work through supportive services with a caseworker in their own home. And then we had 1,934 children served through foster care in either kinship or foster placement. And you'll notice that doesn't account for all 7,334. That's because sometimes you can be supported for abuse and neglect, but not have ongoing services. And those circumstances range from, maybe it was supported abuse, but it wasn't someone who lives in the home. Like maybe the cousin came to visit, the cousin smacked around the kid, bruised him, but the cousin lives in Tennessee and isn't going to be back. So it's supported as happening, but they don't have access to injure the child again. Or sometimes all they need is a community referral. So it's supported, but apparently realizes they were needing help and they're connected to something like home visiting or some of these other lower level programs, and DCFS does not keep a case open. So this is kind of, again, talking to your question about how CPS works. So the first thing that happens is it's assigned a priority. Priority ones give CPS 1 hour to respond. These are incredibly rare. These are like the tippy top of emergency type of situations. These are maybe if both parents are being arrested, if maybe we have had a drug raid on a meth lab, those tend to be that high level priority one. Our priority twos have 1 business day or 24 hours to respond. And that means that they have 24 hours to see the child. That is where a lot of our responses are. And then your priority threes are going to be your 3 business days. And those are business days, so they do not count the weekends. We also have an on-call system over the weekend. So if something does come in on a Saturday or Sunday that would be a priority 1 or 2, those are still met by our on-call workers throughout the state. So the way a CPS worker looks is the first contact they're going to make is going to be with the child, with whoever the abuse or neglect is alleged against. Now, if it's a newborn, it will be the child and the parent, obviously. But a lot of these interviews are going to happen with children at school, especially if the allegations are against the parent. So if it's a physical abuse allegation that dad smacked the 5-year-old or the 7-year-old, we're going to go talk to the 7-year-old, most likely at school or somewhere where dad's not present. That interview can and will happen before the parent is notified, which is one of those things that makes people a little bit nervous. But when you step back and think about it, if the information we need to gather is related to a parent who is creating the harm towards a child, we want to make sure that the child is being interviewed in a place that they feel safe enough to talk and not unduly influenced by that caregiver in their home. The next is that both parents will get interviewed as long as they have parental rights. Even if they are not living together, even if it's a divorced set of parents, we will try to talk to both parents because they have rights to know the information about what's going on with their children. Whoever is the alleged perpetrator or the alleged aggressor on our report will always get interviewed. This is going to be done through both scheduled and unscheduled meetings. The very beginning, they're going to be unscheduled because we haven't even met them. We're going to knock on the door. Our CPS workers are amazing humans for being able to ask hard questions while engaging you and sort of walking into your neighborhood, walking into your house, walking into a really unfamiliar situation. a lot of you guys on this call are home visitors. You know that you're coming out to work on early intervention stuff, but normally the family knows you're coming, right? They've agreed to have you come and you've scheduled an appointment. Our CPS workers are often knocking on doors in neighborhoods that I have frankly had law enforcement tell me myself, what are you doing here? Well, I need to go talk to this family. You shouldn't be in this neighborhood. Like, well, we're in this neighborhood. We're in this neighborhood all the time. And it's really an interesting skill watching the social workers balance being able to ask difficult questions while building that engagement and trust with families. The other part of any investigation is going to be collateral information. So we'll talk to, if it's a non-supervision and the kids, have been getting out of the house, we'll talk to the neighbors to see how often they're seeing the children out unsupervised. We might talk to teachers about how the children are doing in school, extended family members. This is where the family can really tell us other people that they would like us to talk to, and so can the referent. So the other person that we'll get talked to is the person who actually called in the referral. They will get to tell us why they called it in, give some more of that information. We have a structured decision-making tool, or the SDM, which is an evidence-informed actuarial assessment that goes through safety and risk concerns. That will give us an outcome of either safe with a plan, or unsafe for the safety assessment. And then we have 3 risk levels. We have a high, a moderate, and a low risk. Safety is looking at the immediate situation, and risk is looking at the likelihood of this situation repeating within the next 6 to 12 months. And then our CPS assessments tend to stay within 30 days. If at that time they see that we need to continue to be involved with the family, that family will get referred to ongoing services, or the case will be closed out and they will not go to ongoing services. And the person who called DCFS will receive notification that the case has been closed, but they do not receive a ton of detail, just that has been investigated and that a decision has been made. Any questions from that? That was a lot of talking about kind of a long and iterative process. Few steps, but can get complicated for sure.
So,
Oh.
sorry, Kurt.
Go ahead, Janelle.
Just that Crystal has a few questions. It says, I've heard that there is an email option for reporting now. Is that true?
So yes, there is a professional email option for reporting. I will have to double check with Marnie if it's gone completely to the public, but there is. And I will get Janelle the link to that we can share with this group.
Okay. And then her other question is, can you explain the anonymity rule for reporters? I have had 2 cases where the parents told us that DCFS told them who reported them.
They should not be telling anybody who reported. I think what we tend to see in practice is families guess. And they continue to guess to anyone who they think might have reported, and then do a little bit of the got you. If you know for a fact they are giving out names and it's not being done, one of the other places sometimes it's done is that they try to pull together like a meeting. So if it's a family member and we're trying to pull a family meeting together to talk about how to create a safety plan, they might learn it in that scenario. But if you have specifics where if we have any staff that are actually just like, oh, this is who called in on you, like we need to know that, because that is definitely against policy. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Kyla, I have another question. Is if the case is not activated or started, do you get a call back saying you looked into it and we decided to not move forward if you've called that in?
So at intake, they will tell you at the time of referral whether or not it will go on to CPS. So you'll know at the end of a referral whether or not it's going to be accepted for a CPS case. And at the end of the CPS case, you will get a letter notifying you that the case has completed.
Okay.
But that's about as much detail as you get unless you're part of the ongoing child and family team.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
So I don't know if you can see that. I don't. wanna-
So I mean, we definitely have parents who tell their children not to talk to us. And sometimes children, even without being coached not to talk to us, are scared to talk to us. I mean, that's kind of the nature of all of the different personalities and things out there. They will still try to do the interview. All child interviews are recorded. Once an investigation's done, a family has a right to request those recorded hearings to hear what we said and what the children said. Oh, you got great questions. Okay, but yeah, so technically we can't stop parents from what they coach their kids to do. And each one of these would kind of be dealt on an individual basis. We would still try to talk to them first, and understand what's going on in their home, and then let them know we will go talk to your parents next. And most of the time the child interview happens probably 15 to 20 minutes prior to then a parent being contacted. So there's not usually a long period of time between the two, unless maybe the child discloses something that is going to warrant some further action, right? Sometimes we go and interview kids and they tell us some things that does make it unsafe for them to go home. And so before we go out and interview the parents, we're going to make sure we have a safe place for that child to leave school. These always tend to happen at like 5 minutes before school gets out. And so then we have to panic and do some things to make sure the child has somewhere safe to be until we can finish interviewing those parents and make a safety decision about where that child can go that day. All right, Crystal, I see if a parent is arrested. So this one, again, is situational. Most of the time, law enforcement will call child welfare. Occasionally, law enforcement just takes the children to the emergency shelter, and then that's how child welfare knows they came. So it depends kind of where in the arrest process we are when we find out that there are children. If we're contacted early enough, DCFS will actually come out on scene and try to locate appropriate family. Sometimes law enforcement locates family and leaves the children with the family that they locate, and child welfare isn't even contacted. So it looks different depending on which police agency is responding. But it is a little bit dependent on the police agency letting us know, or feeling like they don't have a person to leave the children with. So if it's a two-parent household and mom's getting arrested, most likely they will still just leave the child with the other caregiver in the home. Sometimes if they have concerns about the other caregiver, that's when they would call child welfare. If we come out, we will try our best to find a relative that we can leave the children with, so that they don't have to come into foster care simply because of an arrest. But sometimes that does happen. These are great questions. Okay. So the next step in the process is if you do have an ongoing case, CPS outcomes are supported, unsupported, or without merit. So supported means that there was enough evidence located during that assessment to support the allegation against the person. Unsupported was that there was not enough evidence to support. Without merit is rare, and that just means that not only was there not enough evidence, but there was contrary evidence to say that this allegation never happened. These sometimes come up. Unfortunately, DCFS gets drug into some places that we don't belong. Sometimes we can be the hammer that maybe a contentious divorce uses, or a cantankerous neighbor uses. They're rare, and if you do, there is statute that says if you are someone who is calling in unfounded investigations over and over, and there's a pattern of behavior, you can actually be criminally charged with that, because we don't want to be used as, again, we're a hammer. You should not be pulling us out just because your neighbor annoyed you with their rock music. So that is why that allegation type or that outcome type is there. Kurt, did you unmute again because you had a question?
No, I just stayed unmuted just so I can give you one if it comes up.
Okay, perfect. All right. So next steps, if the case is without merit or unsupported, that simply goes to some community connection to resources. A lot of times families, even if it isn't a supported finding of abuse and neglect, can use connections. We do a lot of connections to services through DWS, through home visiting, through early intervention, and then you're notified that the case was closed. The next steps, if it's supported, we'll decide the level of intervention. So some supported cases still just get community-based referrals to our local mental health authorities for treatment, to maybe, you know, private insurance mental health therapy, the parenting support. Sometimes it's even as easy as helping with some of those concrete things. We also have our PSC or our collaborative cases. So what that means is that there's enough evidence that we do need to keep child welfare involved in your life, but the family is open to wanting to make changes. They recognize that these are concerns and we can work with you collaboratively and not have to involve the child welfare court, the juvenile court. The other option is our PSS, which is where a petition is filed to juvenile court. The parents still retain custody of their children, but they have court-ordered interventions and supervision through the state. And then last, but and we try to avoid whenever safely possible, is that the kids come into foster care. And these letters, SCF, substitute care foster, but nobody talks like that. But the little letter code has stayed. So anybody, especially our foster parent for 15 years, has probably heard those letters. So I put them on here for anyone that knows the system. And it's like, what the heck is SCF? That means that they are in substitute care or with foster parents or kinship families. So that's the next piece, is that we always are looking that children should remain with their families whenever safely possible. And that can include extended family. So we look at a lot of our in-home services, and we talk about those 3,000 cases in 2020 that were in-home. It's a lot of parenting skills. It's a lot of developing safety plans and changing some behavioral plans, conflict resolution skills and problem-solving skills, and linking to broad community resources. A lot of mental health therapy. About 70% of our cases in child welfare in general have some substance use involvement. So there's a lot of connection to our local mental health and substance abuse authorities and to our treatment facilities. In-home cases typically run from about 3 months to a year. We try to keep them between 3 and 6 months, but sometimes families need support a little bit longer, and that's totally okay. These services are either funded through a family's Medicaid, their own private insurance, or DCFS does have some state general fund dollars that go towards paying for these services and connecting these families with the goal of true behavioral change so that those calls do not come back to child welfare. We always are looking to build the 5 protective factors. Is anybody in here familiar with these? Because I don't want to spend too much time talking about them if you're all doing protective factor surveys. I was in a group the other day and they're like, oh yeah, we do them at the beginning and the end of all of our involvement. How familiar is this group with protective factors? We can do that low, medium, high again. Okay, couple highs, couple mediums. All right, so just quick overview. The way that child welfare uses the protective factors, they come out of the Center for the Study of Social Policy. They really are predictive of families that can be successful outside of child serving systems. They're actually 5 skills that anybody building is better off at. Anytime I do an in-depth training on these, I use my own children, because building protective factors in my own 3 have hit different opportunities under all of them. So the first one is that resilience, really helping teach those problem-solving skills, celebrating small wins, the very tangible pieces of resilience building is having success, setting up an opportunity to have a small success, celebrate that success, and help them take on that next success. My walk away anytime I talk about resilience is it is about self-care, but we have to be realistic self-care. A lot of, if you go to BuzzFeed or the internet for self-care articles, I love the number of bubble bath recommendations, but if I'm a single mother of twins under 3, a bubble bath is a recipe for disaster more often than self-care and relaxing, right? Like, we got to make sure that what we're giving parents as ways of building resilience are actually tangible and practical for where they are currently at. So social connections is connecting people to appropriate and supportive connections. There are 2 key elements for this one. It's the quality of the social connections. So I might have 4,200 Facebook friends, but if only 2 of them would come get me off the side of the road to fix my tire, I really only have 2 viable social connections. And it also has to be my willingness to turn to them. So a lot of times in social work, we'll do things like eco maps or genograms, and we'll list all of these family members to say, look, here's your support system. But if I would rather die of humiliation than actually reach out to my mother-in-law, not actually a social connection that I'm going to utilize. So kind of that next step of the question is not just who's appropriate in your life, but who are you actually willing to be vulnerable to? Knowledge of parenting and child development. This is really based on the tenet of having unrealistic expectations for your children and your child individual, right? I have 2 kids 14 months apart, and they did not do a single thing on the same timetable. And I used to take my youngest one to the doctor all the time because I'm like, she's not doing this yet. She's not doing this yet. And finally, my pediatrician looked me dead in the eye and he's like, it's because that one was a freak, right? Because my oldest one did everything ahead of schedule. And so I assumed my younger one had all kinds of problems because I was doing the apples and oranges thing. I was comparing them. And finally, he had to break it down to me and be like, no, she's normal. That one's weird. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And that was good learning for me. So it's about having good resources, places to go to. You guys are all, in fields that help build the, this child development understanding and not comparing children, especially children who have been through the child welfare system. Children who have experienced abuse and neglect and trauma are going to be on a little bit different timetables and making that an okay place. And recognizing that every parent has teachable moments. This is my other confession. I just sent my first child out to college. She moved out, and this is a beautiful teachable moment for me. I have no idea. I have no idea how to parent an adult human. So all advice welcome right now, because I don't know what I'm doing. The next one is concrete supports in times of need. It is 30 more years of research through CSSP to say that Maslow knew what he was talking about. And that we really have to take a step back and say, did you eat today? Did you have a safe place to sleep last night? We see a lot of this with behavioral things going on with children. When we have our teens that come to child welfare attention for their own delinquent behaviors, a lot of times it comes from not having the secure base of safety and nurture and being able to have food, clothing, shelter, and a secure basis. And just really saying, are we seeing behaviors that are resistant because they're actually resistant, or are they there because we're not meeting some of those lower basic level needs? The other piece with this is that we're teaching advocacy, asking for help, normalizing the need for help. Utah consistently is on the national scale for the least likely to ask for help. We are a pull yourselves up by the bootstraps kind of state. And so helping normalize, it's okay to hit a part where you need help and services, and we're going to teach you how to get what you need for yourself and for your children. And then the last, but definitely not least, is the social emotional competence of children. A bunch of research to say that difficult children are harder to parent. Kind of that aha moment, right? We all knew that. It's about the different parenting challenges that each child individually brings, and how are we helping children have connection to a broad range of emotional experiences, right? How do we teach you to handle when you make a mistake? How do we help you express sadness and anger in a healthy way? And how do we give you opportunities to have age-appropriate social interaction, age and development appropriate social interaction? So that is a 5-second quick overview. And Nancy, if you have other questions or want any more information around protective factors, I can talk about these all day. I love them. The magic is really in looking at these as kind of a lens for understanding behavior. So how it applies in child welfare, I'll give you one really great example. When I have a client who's been doing really well in drug treatment, she's been sober and she relapses. That can be very frustrating. And I can assume that it's resilience, right? They don't have enough coping skills. Or I can assume that it's concrete support. They haven't done enough treatment. But maybe the reality is that her drug dealer was in jail, or her best friend that she got drunk with or did these substances with has been incarcerated, and they got out last Friday and they were like, hey, you're my only friend, and if I'm gonna be your friend, you have to do this with me, and peer pressure them into. So is it that they don't have any sober connections, and that's really, really hard to remain sober if I'm alone and everyone else is gonna be like, oh, you're lame now, versus having had access to treatment, versus having, we had one situation where it was actually their spouse had no intention of not drinking because there weren't an alcoholic. So they were bringing alcohol into the home consistently as this mother was trying to struggle with her sobriety. And so really looking at what is the driver, using these 5 as kind of a lens can really help us intervene in a more meaningful way. Okay, how's everybody doing? Janelle, how am I doing on time?
I can't get to my unmute in enough time. So you have about 5 to 10 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, beautiful. So these are all the things we're trying to do to prevent a child coming in. We want to build your protective factors. We want to connect you to interventions. We want to keep the family together. We have a lot of great services that actually come into the family home and work on your current family dynamic. If unfortunately the child does need to come into foster care, there are legal placement preferences. So that first one is that we would place with a non-custodial parent. The second is kinship or family friend. Kinship. The next one is family friend. So kinship would be relative or extended relative. So that can be cousins, great aunts, uncles, grandparents, great grandparents. Then we have close family friends. The only caveat on that is that the child has a relationship with, which gets a little hairy when we're talking about newborns who don't have a relationship with anybody yet. But most of the time we are still able to license that family friend through demonstrated connection to the rest of the family. Because ideally, we know that there's a whole family around these children most of the time. And we want to make sure that we're giving them a chance to know where they come from. We also know that our children that do age out of our foster care system tend to go find those biological families anyway. And we want to make sure that we've given that people need a sense of identity and they will go find where they came from. Our fourth option then is foster homes. I know we have a wonderful foster parent who has done some great things for us. We do wind up in foster homes about 40% of the time right now in the state of Utah. And then if the child has behaviors that cannot be managed in a foster home, they then have our proctor level of care, which is a more structured foster care system. So these are for kind of our behavioral youth. And then our last and most restrictive that we like to use the least often is a congregate care setting or a residential or group home setting. These we keep very close eye on. We're always reviewing after about 3 months. We really hope that we never have a youth have to spend any longer than about 6 months, except for incredibly rare situations. We want to make sure that we are in the least restrictive placement possible for these children. Our goals always begin with reunification, except for in extreme circumstances. We also set a concurrent goal anytime that we're involved. So we have our plan A and our plan B. If reunification cannot happen and the child is under the age of 12, our goal is once parental rights are terminated is always adoption. We do custody and guardianships with relatives and non-relatives, but there's still a federal preference for adoption over guardianship. And then we do have individualized permanency for our youth over 12 who decline to be adopted. So children over the age of 12 can say that they do not wish to be adopted, although we continue to work with our youth that are legally free over the age of 12 to try to convince them that having a legal tie to a family is better than aging out. If anyone wants to be really depressed, you can Google the national outcomes for children that age out of a foster care system alone. It's not great. Like I said, I've got my first adult daughter and I can't even imagine, she calls me like 7 times a day. I can't imagine her not having anyone to ask. And she's very smart and I have a college degree, and trying to figure out her scholarship and the dorm and a million others, like I can't imagine her being out there completely alone. And yet we know we have these children who've experienced pretty significant trauma and loss are now out there navigating the world alone. So we definitely want to do everything we can to prevent that moving forward. Okay, so that was a lot and I ended on a very depressing note, but I would also like to remind you it's a very small percentage of our kids that get to aging out. And if anyone is interested in fostering older youth, please talk to me, because we could always use more foster homes for children over the age of 12. If you're looking for a smelly teenager to replace your smelly teenagers, we've got you some. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? I feel like I just yapped at my computer screen for an hour.
Hey, Kyla, I have a question. So my daughter that we fostered, when they called us, she was only a day old, and we were informed that there was no chance of reunification with parents, and that it was a very high probability for adoption. So we actually picked her up from the hospital. This was, I think this was back in 2017. So it was before the 2020 change. Parents had already lost 3 children. So we ended up adopting her. They didn't have any chance. They signed their rights away. Interestingly enough, though, about a year ago, we got a phone call saying that mom had another little girl. And she was placed in a foster home. It was with a different dad, but there was a very high push towards reunification. And I find that interesting. Yes, the rules changed, but if the circumstances were so dire with our daughter when we adopted her, what would just the husband possibly being not quite as, I don't know, addicted or naughty?
It also could be circumstance. Like, so there's a lot of things that make this work so far from black and white. So depending on what, I mean, we're talking in 5 years. So has mom had any stretch of sobriety? Like, and I don't know how quickly between her other children that she lost and this baby, sometimes it's during a case where they're already about to terminate on some other kids and a baby's born where it was just going to automatically get added to that petition. There's been some judge changes in the last 5 years that are different. And there's also been some research. So for a while, in probably 2015 to probably around 2017, there was this belief that you could file for no reunification based on pattern of behavior. And we did it a lot with fetal exposure. But then we did some research and realized that basically all that does is increase the likelihood that we have 2 to 3 more children by the same mother who also have fetal exposure. And so the pendulum kind of swung back to, well, let's at least try to get them sober, if not for this child, for future children. And so that, I think you were just kind of in that where it was still at the, well, they're never going to change, so why, let's not even bother with services, to realizing that the services are like, they're for the mother, but they're also for the possible future children, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And I think that child welfare, like if you were involved in the child welfare system 20 years ago, like I have a coworker who came from our child welfare system here in the state of Utah, and she's our lived experience expert. And she can talk to in beautiful detail all of the different things that we've changed, because we were always trying to become more trauma informed and evolve, right? And so I think that what you were seeing is this little bit of that we were kind of writing off some parents. The other thing that changes a lot is circumstance. So a single parent who has no support system, who's like, I just want to sign this baby over, versus maybe this husband or this father is more supportive, or they have an extended family member, maybe they have somewhere safe to move out, leave the hospital and go to, versus maybe last time she was leaving the hospital and going to a shelter. Like there are some of those other, like, what does the rest of the team around this mom look like, that might be leading into that decision as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know she was released from prison while they were fostering her daughter, but I also know that the birth father was more stable. So I wonder if that connection had something to do with it.
Oh, I'm certain, and especially because you know, if he's not going to sign over his rights, they would have to have grounds for termination. So
yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you.
Kyla, I loved your comment of that. This is not just for the current children, we're helping families for future ones. And I think that as an early intervention provider, we can all really relate to that, because while we're maybe working on child development with one child, we're hoping that those strategies also trickle down to any other future kids that they have. So that was just a great, I loved that saying you did. And then there's one question from Crystal again.
I love that. So we don't technically have like an outsider fund for that. We do have some of our federal grant money set aside for youth to participate in extracurricular activities. There's like an allotment of about $2,000 per family that can be flexible, related to those sort of things, to get families and our youth involved with activities. And then if they are in foster care, there are some other, we use our federal Chafee funds for connecting them to all kinds of other fun activities to hopefully leave our system as well-rounded as possible.
Any other questions or things for Kyla before we start our case discussion?
I'm curious, Crystal, how do the Utah numbers compare to Arizona?
Of children in foster care?
Yeah, or just like that 1 year.
I actually don't know. We serve just a small part of Arizona.
See, I'm always curious with another state, like where I was in a meeting once with Los Angeles County, and their numbers terrified me, and I'm like, that's one county. It's not even a whole state.
It is always crazy. Well, thank you so much, Kyla. And you guys should have gotten her PowerPoint prior to the call, but I will also send it out again. And I know that Kyla will always respond to emails and always take those questions. So thank you. That was such great information. So our case presentation today is on a child that I served about 3 months ago, and the mom has called me again to reach out for some other supports and resources. So I'm asking you guys to help me with this. So this child has had trauma. There's some big trauma in her family. She was drug exposed. She was diagnosed with neonatal abstinence syndrome. She has had some child delays as well as some sensory concerns. So the child right now is 3 months, three 3 months, and not, so I kicked her out of early intervention. No, 3 years, 3 months. So she was in early intervention. She is currently now in a preschool setting. She has difficulty both at home. She does live with an adoptive mother and father and non-biological younger sister. And she is now currently in a preschool setting. They adopted her approximately when she was 16 months old. So the primary concerns that the family has been having and the child care setting or the preschool setting is that initially there were over 35 tantrums per week, ranging in intensity. The difficult behavior has subsided at home, but then increased again since the start of their preschool. And the kid goes for 4 days a week for 3 hours a day. Sleep has always been an issue. She is currently getting less than 1 hour per night of sleep. So 1 hour less per night for her recommended age. She will throw objects, she screams, she flails her body. She goes after the family dog. She will lay on the sister. She refuses food. She has some other aggression, like hitting and throwing things at others towards mom, dad, sisters, and cousins. So far, they haven't reported any of that aggression to peers at school. And some of the common triggers is that she becomes upset when anything is out of place, or when she is denied access to something she wants, or when she is asked to do something that she doesn't want to do. She has also been observed to lay on top of her sister and chase the dog and pull on its tail or lay on it. She does mom's reporting that she will wakes or stirs over 20 times per night. The types of strategies that the family has been using is they've been doing some specific praise and reducing verbal attention about the misbehavior. It's somewhat getting there. Mom does better at that. Dad sometimes gives into some of the misbehavior. They've done a visual schedule. They've been successful, but the schedules themselves have to be very detailed and specific. They have tried a weight card with minimal success. They've been working on turn taking. When it's an adult, it's more successful. With peers her age, it's very limited success. They have also participated in PCIT training, and that's parent-child. What does the I stand for, Kurt?
Interaction.
There you go. Interaction therapy. With feeding, they offer reinforcement per bite. They do try some jewelry. They've tried melatonin to help with some of the sleep. So some of the questions that we would like really some help around is gaining some ideas around sleep. What are some other ideas? And that transition when now that it has increased at daycare, like how to get her behavior back in check at home. So those would be the two ones that I'm hoping to provide some parents with some support on it. The strengths is that she's really adorable. She's just a cute little girl. She's really developmentally appropriate in her speech and language. there is really some strong support with the adopted parents and the family. They attend an in-person preschool. They are on she is on an IEP. The challenges are always that they are in a rural community. And so any like outside therapy options are a good distance away. So Bailey is going to break us into groups. And so I'm excited to hear all of your guys' ideas and thoughts around those two questions.
The rooms have been open, so you
Closing of the breakout rooms. Mid-sentence, you get cut off, right, guys? So just in our last little bit of chatting, I just want to remind everybody to complete this survey. We will be sharing all of your guys' recommendations. So from Tressa and Kurt's group, if you guys took the notes, if you will send those to me, those recommendations will be on the Canvas website. So if you were like, I have a kiddo that's not doing very well at sleeping, be sure to pull up those ideas and recommendations from it. There are some really great ones that come out of your guys' groups. So thank you for joining us today. And we will see you next time.